the Institute of Commonwealth Studies and the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. I wear a number of hats. And I want to congratulate you for choosing to come and join us today. The next slide, as you can see, there's a number of different institutes are involved in the School of Advanced Study. And we're having a combined webinar for a few of those institutes, Refugee Law Initiative, Digital Humanities. We're going to talk about their areas of expertise and why you should do a doctorate with them. Thanks, Kate, if you could do the next slide. Now, this is sort of more of a general talk about why you would choose a PhD. And I think this is really important for all the presentations today. The School of Advanced Studies is a specific specialized organization of many research institutes. We do not do undergraduate teaching. We do master's and doctoral education. We have a specific expertise in doctoral education, and I would say a world-leading training program that is offered by the School of Advanced Study Doctoral Center. And any student who enrolls is able to take this training on a free basis. And it's things like interviewing skills, research methodology, databases, and even to the point where we have a dedicated careers officer as well, who could talk about writing CVs and applications for positions. So it's from the beginning of your PhD journey to the end of your PhD journey. Each of the institutes has a director of the PhD program who ensures that you meet the appropriate milestones in your degree. So why would anybody study for a PhD? And I often tell this story that the study of a PhD was the best time in my life. I waited many years to be able to do it, and it was absolutely transformative. And I think the first to scratch an intellectual itch, to expand on an MA thesis that you enjoyed, or to simply research something you were interested in. And my story was that I was an Army brat in Canada. My father had served in the Canadian Armed Forces, and I wanted to study the law of war. Honestly, that was and it was an ambition of mine for most of my life. Quite frankly, when I was younger, women didn't do that kind of work. That was part of what the reason was. But I always had an interest in really developing my academic interest in that field. To gain the highest academic research qualification was also important. The fact that I would be the first doctor in my family for generations and generations meant a lot to me. It was as a woman who had started in a profession, the legal profession, where I was not welcome, where I was discriminated against. It was very important to me to be called doctor. For the men here in the audience, I can tell you when a judge would call me Ms., it was always a slur. And being able to say you can call me doctor was a very, very big thing in my life. To increase your chances of obtaining a research position, well, not only increase your chances, these days, everything is so competitive that sometimes a doctorate is the admission criteria for even being considered for a position. That is certainly in academia, but in civil societies, NGOs, government, businesses, international agencies. Just a little anecdote, I was told that, in fact, to become a senior partner in some business and legal firms, a doctorate is expected. And as I said, to become an academic, to teach in a university, a doctorate is the bare minimum of the application process. Next slide. Next slide, Kate. Okay, so how do you get into the PhD program? Now, specifically, I'm talking about the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, but I believe this is common throughout the different institutes. Now, the Institute of Commonwealth Studies is a hybrid institute in the fact that it doesn't specialize in one specific subject. However, Commonwealth is a big hint. So the fact is that if you have studied history, politics, law, sociology, environmental studies, but you would have to have a master's degree in the field. Funding is essential, either self-funding, most often by a loan, savings, working while studying part-time. I have to say that the funding landscape in the UK is difficult right now. It is difficult to get funding to do your PhD. And I often send that in the initial email I send to the student. I say, this is going to be tough. A distinction MA grade enhances the chances of obtaining grant funding. It is not essential for getting into a PhD. And I often tell students, I didn't have a distinction. I had a merit in my master's, and I'm very proud of that. If you want to have funding, you must cast your net far and wide. And this might mean that you join an established research project. The other thing is to have a career plan. What does this mean in your life? Why are you doing the PhD after your master's? And what is the long-term goal? Next slide. So why do a PhD at the Commonwealth Studies? It's a renowned institute with a strong human rights focus, with a focus on Commonwealth. It's interdisciplinary. It has library and student resources, the Senate House and the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies Library, and there is a student organization called SAS Society. I've already mentioned the superb training program, so I won't mention it again. And supervisors, there are 2 supervisors, usually one internal and one external. Next slide. Now, this is the most important slide, is to remember my email. The first thing I like to do is to say to students, please contact me first. I send you an email back with a review of how you prepare a research proposal. The most important part of the email is a CV and a research proposal. But if you have not yet developed your research proposal, this on the slide, review the literature, identify the gaps, I send that to you. I have a 1-pager that I send to you saying how you prepare a research proposal. You can look at it on the slides, but you can also contact me. And sometimes that's important because you'll say, I'm thinking of doing research. And this happened to me recently. I'm thinking of doing research of agriculture in Uganda, for example. And I had to say to the student that I wouldn't be able to find a supervisor in our institute who was an expert in agriculture in Uganda. It's very important to scope out what area you're thinking of studying. Next slide. Okay. Now, if you're not following the funding opportunities, you're all free to choose your institute and supervisor. The reputation of the institute is less important than the expertise of the department or school, but more important still is the expertise of the supervisor. The director, me, will determine if supervision is available. And if the application is a good one and 2 supervisors are available, the next step will be to interview to determine if the supervision team would work. Now, I have to say something about this. Many students want to do a country-specific project. I've received many applications from students who say they want to do research in a specific country. That is difficult for me. You must remember we're in the United Kingdom. You must remember that the specialty of many of our supervisors and the fellows of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies is international. So it's actually better if you do some kind of a comparison involving the Commonwealth, and I can give you some advice about that. But if you want to do a country-specific project, you should be applying to universities in that country. They will have the supervisors, but we do not. We do not have individual country experts. That is not what we do. Human rights is an international topic. The Commonwealth has many, many members, and governance of the Commonwealth is something we're quite interested in promoting. Climate change is an international subject. Freedom of information. If you look at our website, we give you sort of hints about the areas that are very interesting to us. But the reason for that, it's no reflection on your qualifications or the quality of your proposal. But if I cannot find a supervisor, your application will not be accepted. Next slide, thank you. So the study structure, full-time 3 years, part-time 6 years. The year 1 is usually you take your training, you draft 1 chapter at 10,000 words. This can be also 2 years if you're part-time, and you are considered for what's called progression. Year 2, you could start your field work if you're doing field work, and you apply after year 2 for upgrade to a PhD, and that means another couple of chapters. So it's basically you've done 3 chapters or about a third of your thesis. And then year 3, you are writing up and applying for jobs. But there is a possibility, and it's very common, and it is not a reflection on your skill, that the PhD may go over the 3 years. That often happens. And we do offer an option of what's called a writing up year, where you can apply to finish your thesis. But if you apply for that, your thesis has to be substantially completed. During this time, you have regular supervision, conference attendance, research presentations, training. And I have to tell you, every week you get an email of the events that are in SAS, and there's so many it would boggle your mind. And I urge students to take advantage of the fact that this is available. What's not on the slide that I want to make clear is this can be distance learning. You can do all of this online. And many students these days, because of the cost of living in London, are applying for a distance learning PhD. There is no difference, not in tuition, not in the study pattern. Some of our supervisors are from all over the world as well. Next slide. So as I said, I'm not going to go over this again, just to point out the deadlines. Applications for January 2026 will close on October 30th, 2025. Applications for September, which will interest most of you, they close on the 31st of July. So you have plenty of time to email me with your ideas, to prepare your research proposal, to prepare your CV. If it passes that stage, then you go on to the online system and make the application. Next slide. And as I said, the most important thing is to email me and to discuss your proposal. We welcome a variety of proposals, but as I said, there has to be a link to the Commonwealth and a link to the specialties that are involved in the Commonwealth. And as I said, a single country proposal would be difficult. Thank you. That is my part of the presentation. And Kate, maybe you can introduce who is next.
Thank you, Susan. That was so informative. Really appreciate your time and your insight there. We're going to hand next over to David, who I believe is on the line. There he is. I can see David, and he even has his correct name. So we're doing well here. David, thank you for joining us. Professor David Cantor is the director of the Refugee Law Initiative, and he will be speaking to the PhD offering there. Over to you, David.
Many thanks indeed. Well, those of you who read newspapers will know that refugee protection and forced migration studies is always topical and never far from the headlines. Refugee protection and forced migration studies is an exciting and fast-moving field of research as well. And if you're looking to do postgraduate work in this field, then the Refugee Law Initiative might be somewhere that you're thinking of. So talking a little bit about the institution, we were founded in 2010, so we're celebrating our 15th anniversary at the moment, as the world's first centre dedicated to research on refugee law and policy specifically. At present, we serve as a national focal point for leading and promoting research in this field, and we work very much to stimulate collaboration between academics and practitioners and do a lot of work achieving policy impact at the national and international levels. There are a wide range of opportunities to study with us. We have a distance learning master's programme in refugee protection and forced migration studies, which has truly global reach, with over 200 students in more than 60 countries studying on it at any one time. In tandem, of course, we offer the opportunity for on-campus doctoral study in London with the range of eminent specialists who are based here as staff or as senior research affiliates of the Refugee Law Initiative. And alongside that, we also run a range of specialist research methods training and other training courses on the refugee field as well. And PhD students are often very much involved in that too. So why study with the RLI? Well, studying with us gives you access to the research specialists and policy experts who are hosted here as staff, as fellows, as students, as well as our extensive and unparalleled global networks of research affiliates and practitioners in a range of organisations, from the UN Refugee Agency all the way across to local community research, refugee organisations in a range of countries. You'll also benefit from the invaluable resources that we host in the refugee field, and those exist alongside the many other academic resources offered by the School of Advanced Study, the University of London, and their libraries, and which Susan mentioned just a moment ago. So what are these key resources that I'm talking about? Well, they include the many innovative research projects and academic conferences and events led by RLI staff on key challenges such as internal displacement during conflicts, mobility and displacements in relation to climate change, the offshoring of refugee protection, and so on. We also host 2 of the 3 main journals in the field, those being the International Journal of Refugee Law and the Refugee Survey Quarterly, both of which are published by Oxford University Press. We also have our own dedicated book series published by the prestigious Brill-Nijhoff imprint, as well as a range of blogs and other publication platforms that PhD students are often very keen to be publishing in or helping with the editing on. Perhaps as the last thing to mention, just in terms of the various resources, is our Refugee Law Clinic. And this is an intercollegiate project with 10 of the law schools of the University of London and 3 commercial law firms. And that's engaged very much in the practical legal education of students and, of course, also practicing lawyers through pro bono representation of appeals rights exhausted asylum seekers in our local community in London. So what are we looking for from our students? So I'd say that the principal thing is outstanding students who have a strong background in the field already and who are keen on a narrow area that they've already started to identify and that they might wish to discuss further with us as they hone their research proposals. If you're interested in studying with us, then by all means take a look at our website, see the range of activities that are going on throughout the year, maybe come along to our conference or one of our seminars and have a chat to us informally. I hope that gives a good sense of what we're about and, broadly speaking, within the broad structure of the School of Advanced Study, what the Refugee Law Initiative does within this field and what our offer is specifically for research degrees too. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, David. Again, it's always so insightful to hear from the people closest to this area of work and research. And I'm sure that was inspiring and thought-starting for a lot of the people who've joined here today. We appreciate your time. And finally, we're going to hand over to Dr. Gabriel Bodard, who is the Director of Studies for both the Institute of Classical Studies as well as the Digital Humanities Research Hub. So, Gabriel, would you like me to start with Digital Humanities or Classical Studies?
Maybe with Classical Studies, if that's...
Yeah, let me get those slides up for you one moment.
That's what I'd assumed was coming first, so that's what I'm thinking of at the moment.
Perfect. All right, they should be appearing now.
Great. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to present these two different PhD programs. I was thinking of literally bringing 2 different hats, so we could visualize me as 2 different people, but that felt gimmicky. So, but I'm going to talk about them as 2 different programs. The fact that I'm presenting both of them is really coincidence rather than a particular connection between them, except that I happen to be involved in both of them. So I'll talk about the Classical Studies program first. So all of the things, I mean, if we can go to the first slide. Yeah, so all of the things we've said about PhDs in SAS and what a PhD is and how you apply for one. And so all of these apply. To say a couple of things about the Institute of Classical Studies, it's a slightly different kind of body than most classics departments in universities in the UK. And you know, the fact that it's called an institute rather than a department reflects that. As has already been said, we don't have an undergraduate program. The Institute of Classical Studies doesn't have a master's program either, although we do teach on the intercollegiate master's program with UCL, King's and Royal Holloway. I mean, we have close relations with various other programs nearby, including Birkbeck and Roehampton and others, and we also have close relationships with the British Museum and the British Library. So we have quite a lot of good connections in areas around classics and the related discipline, and that very much reflects the way we mostly work. So we mostly work in this area of promotion and facilitation of research, and supervising PhDs is part of that. So while we're a much smaller department than most PhD programs in classics, we are linked in with this very large network. So you will still get quite a lot of connection through that. I've probably started talking about what's on the next slide already as well, but the kinds of activities that the ICS mostly carries out are these sorts of things that are on the slide. So we have events, we have a lot of visitors, we have a certain amount of small grants that we make available. We produce some publications and our own research projects, but a lot of what we do is researcher training. So that includes training of our own students, students of others, academics, early career academics, and in fact from any point in their career, training in various methods, including but not only digital methods in classics. And the most important thing that the ICS has and does, and the elephant in the room really is the library. So this is very much the classics library, largely of arguably of the UK, possibly even of the world. So if you studied classics already at master's level, especially if you're anywhere near the south of England, you've almost certainly used the classics library at the ICS. You know that it's a massive and beautiful library. Yes, next slide, please. We talked about the context of SAS and of Senate House itself. The important thing to note about this is that there's the massive Senate House library that's been discussed is from floors 4 upwards in Senate House, and the ICS library is on floor 3. So we're very much connected to that, and the academic offices are also on floor 3. That's where we are, and the British Museum is literally next door. You know, we can you know, almost get out there without getting wet on the rainiest day. It's a very short dash across the road there. Yes, next slide, please. So we've talked about what a PhD is. A lot of this has already been talked about by our previous presenters. I think just to note about application and supervision is that, and I'll talk in a moment about the areas of supervision that we offer, is that the process of applying, and we don't call it an interview, we call it a meeting and discussing with your supervisors, potential supervisors, is very much, it's not so much for us to decide if you're a good candidate for the PhD program, as much as it is for you to decide if we're a good candidate as someone you want to take on as your supervisors. And it really is a two-way discussion. And as other people have stressed, it really does depend on fit. So if you want to work on something that we don't have the expertise for, we will all unanimously, agree that this isn't the right place for you to be doing that PhD. So we will have those conversations. So very often, I would say, start by contacting the potential supervisor directly. If you're not sure who that is, feel free to contact me. And I will potentially put you in touch with someone, or I might tell you, we're the wrong place to be looking. Might give you some pointers to other academics to be talking to. As others have said, you probably want to be talking to several different potential supervisors across the country while you're making this decision to find the best fit. You may also find that that expands the range of funding that's available to you and so forth. So that's not something you need to be coy about. I'm also talking to Oxford, absolutely fine. Yeah, I'd be worried if you weren't. So that sort of thing is fine and normal. Yes, next slide, please. And we've talked a bit about what a PhD is, and this slide, I really kept this slide here partly because what I'm going to talk about in the next section on digital humanities has a slightly different answer here. So, but the important thing is that a PhD is largely 3 years, if full time, of independent research, which will end with the writing of a up to 100,000 word thesis. You'll get a lot of support from your supervisor, but you effectively call the shots in terms of that. No one will tell you what to do. No one will give you a research project and guide you through it. You will have your research project, and they will advise you through it. But it's very much your work. Yes, next slide, please. So the most important thing I think to take away from this, and apologies for this slightly crowded slide, I should maybe split this over a couple of slides, but there are 5 of us in the Institute of Classical Studies who are potential supervisors for you. Sometimes we supervise together, so both of your supervisors will be from this list. Sometimes it'll be one of us and somebody external, including potentially someone from a museum or library nearby, depending on the subject area, and it could also be someone who's not actually anywhere near London. We have people co-supervise, in the north of England or Scotland or even overseas. So just to sort of see the range of interests of people here. So my interests are very much around digital classics. We have Professor Deasy's interests largely around religion and mythology and literature. Emily's interests are very much around Roman archaeology and particularly agriculture and the economy. Professor Harlow's interests are largely in the history of classical scholarship and reception, and Professor Harrison's interests in historiography and Greek, both religion and the interaction with other cultures of the ancient Mediterranean. So there's quite a wide range here, but you see it doesn't cover every possible aspect of the classics. And if your area is not covered anywhere on this page, then we probably aren't the right people to supervise you. But if you're unsure, then get in touch with it. Well, obviously we can talk further about that. Almost done, but next slide. Yes, we've had some comments already about the community within SAS, and we've had society has been mentioned, the student society. There's also some very specific activities within the ICS. There's a seminar which is run by and for PhD students, mostly around London, but it's a national seminar series, the PG WIP seminar, the postgraduate work in progress. There's a journal called New Classicist, which is edited mostly by postgrads and is publishes work by early career scholars at various levels. So there's quite a lot of community. And as I say, there's a very large classics community in London as a whole that we very much are plugged into. So there's always a lot going on, and there'll be a lot of people for you to talk to and engage with. Especially if you're here in person. There's distance learning option, which makes that slightly more complex, but there's also a lot of online activities going on as well. And I think the final slide is just how to apply, which we've talked a little bit about that already, so I won't necessarily talk through that, but except to say that the most important thing is to contact us first. It's actually not all that useful for us to receive your polished 5-page application through the application system of the university, because firstly you have to pay money to apply in that way, and if we don't have a supervisor who's a good fit for you, or the supervisor who would be a good fit is already has their full complement of PhD students or is on leave or something like that, then we're just going to say no thanks. So it's probably best to get in touch informally first and have that conversation. So I think that's about all I have to say with
Thanks, Gabriel.
Yeah.
It's time for you to change your proverbial hat. I'm going to swap the slides for you. I loved seeing the full range of the research interest areas there. I especially liked Greek and I think it was Greek and Roman magic. I'll have to come pick your brain about that sometimes. That sounds very interesting. Yeah. All right, let me just get up the next slides. So we'll be moving now into digital humanities. And as mentioned before, please add your questions into the chat. Once we're done with this section of the presentation, we'll pose your questions to our presenters. All right, thanks, Gabriel.
Great, thank you. Yes, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the PhD program of the digital humanities group in in SAS Digital Humanities is, as explained on the next slide, is it's currently called the Digital Humanities Research Hub, but it's effectively another institute like the other institutes that have been talked about. It has its own PhD program. It's one of the more interdisciplinary institutes, not the only interdisciplinary institute. We've already seen other presentations, people who've talked about the many different disciplines that contribute to their program. But in Digital Humanities, we have scholars. We have Digital Humanities scholars who are connected to the Classics department, to the English department, to the History department, to the Modern Languages and Cultures department, and we also have people who are core in Digital Humanities, including some people who are very, very technical in that context. So fairly sort of hardcore AI programmers, for example, that sort of thing. So again, the Digital Humanities doesn't have an undergraduate program, doesn't have a master's program, has a lot of connection with the Digital Humanities community across the country, and events and research training, and sort of network and infrastructure. But we do have a very rich community into which we can plug our PhD students and other visiting scholars. As has been said before, the finding a supervisor who's a good fit for your work is the single most important thing. And if the 5 supervisors that we're about to briefly show you are not, don't between them have something that intersects with your interests, then we won't be the right place for you. But so on the next slide we start listing some of those. So Casper is one of our technical leads and does a lot of development and programming and work with AI and natural language programming and so forth, and is very interested in supervising projects with that sort of a focus, with quite a sort of hardcore data science focus. My interests are largely around historical applications of digital humanities methods, so whether those are the encoding of ancient texts or geographical, prosopographical documents, modeling of heritage, those sorts of things. Christopher is a scholar in the English literature, and so he's very interested in textual scholarship, in digital editing, and so forth. Actually, quite a lot of the same things that I'm interested in, just he applies them to a period about 2,500 years later. And next slide. Thank you. Naomi is a scholar in modern languages, in Italian and Spanish, and is very interested in multilingualism and social media, and in particular in web content and born digital content. And Jane, who's the director of the Institute, is particularly interested in born digital archives and web archives, and other aspects of digital cultural heritage, and the sustainability and archiving of digital materials. So you see there is again quite a broad range there, but there are also quite a lot of things that would not be covered. And so although we do very often co-supervise with people from outside of digital humanities, either elsewhere in SAS or elsewhere in London or elsewhere outside of academia, elsewhere in the world, we do a lot of collaborations with museums and archives, for example. And someone here does have to have some connection with your work in order for this to be a goer. Next slide, please. One of the sort of local resources that we have is the makerspace, which is it's a room which is designed. It can be used as a meeting room, and we do have conversations and events there. But it's primarily a space for experimental work and a lot of training. But we do 3D imaging, 3D printing. We do work with replicating 18th and 19th century printing presses. And we have those tiny Raspberry Pi computers and various ways in which those can be applied to things like computer vision, or running small AI applications and so forth. So that's a space that we would very much hope that our students would get involved with and would use a lot and would come and hang out in sometimes. So there's all sorts of opportunities for learning things and doing things in that space, and potentially getting involved in running, training, and events there as well. The next 3 slides are brief, sort of just a reference to the PhD titles of 3 of our more recent students, just to give you a sense of the sorts of work we have had. So Jessica Breau-Frank's PhD was very much a collaboration with museums, and was looking at a particular case study of a scientific museum. And the next one, Rhiannon Lewis's work, was on using social media to study the way people use and reuse materials from museum collections, from online collections of museums. And the next one, please. Yes, Beatrice Canelli has done, again, work on social media, and particularly in looking at archival of the sort of born digital data of social media, and how we, what are the opportunities, but also the problems and hazards of working around the area of archiving of this sort of material. Next slide, please. Yes. So we've talked about how the PhD is normally 3 years full-time or 6 years part-time, with a potential of 1 writing up year in either case. The slight difference in the Digital Humanities PhD is that there are 2 different PhD programs advertised. One is the regular Digital Humanities PhD, which in which you do research for 3 or more years, and then write a thesis, or over the course of it you write a thesis, and that the thesis of 100,000 words or so is examined. The other is the PhD in Digital Humanities by practice. And in this, you're not just writing a thesis, but your research involves creating something. It involves making something, whether that's a creative practice or whether that's a practical, it could be a museum exhibit, it could be a piece of software, a digital edition. And in digital humanities in particular, a lot of people do create quite substantial creative production as part of the PhD, and then they still go ahead and write a 100,000 word thesis, and that is what is examined. So the PhD by practice is a way to actually submit your creation as the thing to be examined. And then you do write a thesis, but it's a much shorter thesis, about 1/3 the length of a full-length thesis, and that is examined alongside your creative production. And this isn't something that we've invented in digital humanities. This is the way a creative writing PhD works, or a music PhD, or a film and drama PhDs work. There's a production. You might write a symphony, but also write a thesis about that symphony, and both of those are being assessed. So that's very much how we sort of imagine this. It's really making sure that you are getting credit for the creative work you do throughout the course of the PhD. So that's a relatively new thing, and we're quite excited about that. So we'd love to hear from people about if they have ideas about that. And the final slide is just how to apply. And I'll just stress again, especially if you're thinking about the PhD by practice, get in touch first. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about who the potential supervisors might be. We do get a lot of queries, maybe 3/4 of which we just don't have the right supervision combination for. But we really are very keen to have more conversations with people about these, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Gabriel. And thank you to all of our speakers. We have a few questions that have come through in the chat now, which I will ask. The first one is, professors often emphasize that a PhD applicant's research proposal should closely align with the expertise of a potential supervisor within the department. Given this, should I reconsider and refine my proposal to ensure the best possible supervision? I might go to you, Gabriel, just because you spoke to that at length, but I feel like you have answered it, but if you have anything to add there.
The main thing I'd add to that is that it's not. I wouldn't. Don't target your proposal at a particular supervisor. If your PhD project is not a perfect fit for the supervisor, find another supervisor. Yeah, or have a chat with the supervisor about whether they, whether they're flexible enough to maybe bring someone else in to enhance their expertise on that. But you absolutely shouldn't, try to skew your work, change your plan to make it a better fit for the supervisor. That's not the point. It's not, it's not a, we're not doing you any favors by taking you on as a student. In fact, I always tell my student, when you're here working with me as a student, you don't work for me. I don't tell you what to do. I work for you, right? You're paying huge fees, and that's part of what that's doing is paying my salary. I work for you, right? So you absolutely shouldn't be changing anything to better fit my interests.
Thanks, Gabriel. Susan, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in and say I'd love Gabriel as my supervisor. He sounds fabulous. But I also want to emphasize one thing he didn't say, and that is this is your project that you're passionate about. Why would you change your passion to suit someone else? This is going to be 3 or 4, or if you're part-time, 6 or 7 years of your life. You cannot modify your proposal to suit somebody else. You need to find the people. And one thing I forgot to mention on my slides is we consider internal supervisors at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies are fellows. So we have a small staff, but we have a large number of research fellows who are also affiliated with the Institute. So I look broadly, but if I say to you, as Gabriel might say to you in his school, I'm sorry, but we don't have a fit. It's because I want you to look somewhere else and find someone who fits with your project. I'm asking you to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks, Gabriel. That were both great clarifications. And I think an important distinction that this is for you first and foremost. So make sure it's something you're passionate about. Don't mold to fit the parameters of the Institute. And then I have a question from Magdalena for David. Would you be happy to mention a couple of recent research titles of the Refugee Law Initiative, please?
Yeah, so we've had a PhD recently looking at comparative approaches to irregular migration in the UK and Australia. We've had one looking at refugee reception in sub-Saharan Africa. Another one is looking at crime-related displacement in Central America. So there's a range of themes. We tend to be a smallish unit. We tend to be most focused on postgraduate teaching, but we do occasionally take on PhD students where appropriate.
Thanks, David. I actually have another question for you as well. So Meltem asks, I'm working on a comparative analysis of the migration policies in Turkey and the UK, focusing on the role of NGOs and the experiences of refugees. Before submitting my PhD application, I'm considering reaching out to you, David, to share my ideas. Would it be appropriate to do so? And I wonder if professors are generally open to helping shape research proposals, or if they prefer not to get involved highly for ethical reasons.
No, I think I'll just repeat what Gabriel said, that we're much keener on hearing from you in the first instance to see whether there's a good fit, see what the options look like in terms of supervision and so on, without you having to then pay the fee. So by all means, I think the general rule is reach out first to people who you think might be good supervisors, see if they're interested, see if there's receptivity there. And if there is, then of course, you can go ahead and refine the proposal. Kate, I'm afraid I do have to leave in 2 minutes. So if there are any other questions.
The meeting will actually end in 1.5 minutes. So we have one more quick question if someone would jump in and answer this one. I'm interested in doing a PhD dissertation on a topic that is very different to my master's dissertation. Does this cause a challenge to being accepted in a PhD program?
I'll jump in and say absolutely not. You can switch your topic. And I think my slide was a bit vague on that, but you could switch your topic from your master's. You can do a different topic. The only criteria, though, is that you've got some background in that topic, that you've studied in a field, like if it's a political science topic, in politics, in law, there'd have to be a fit with your background, but it can be a different topic for sure. And I see Gabriel's nodding, so I got it right.
Yeah, that was a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that in digital humanities in particular, we very often will have someone who has a history master's who wants to do something very digital, but they're applying their history expertise in it with applying digital methods to that, for example. So yes, absolutely. As long as you have some qualification in what you claim you want to do, that's not a disqualifier at all.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We have given you the contacts of our fantastic presenters today, so do reach out to them directly if you have specific questions. You can also reach us on our website through our contact us or inquiry forms. Before we get booted out, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for being so patient with us as we got online this morning, and apologies to the presenters on behalf of the marketing team for the technical difficulties. But thank you for sharing with us. We really appreciate it, and goodbye, everyone. We hope to be welcoming you to one of our institutes very soon.
Thank you. Bye.